Have you ever felt a sudden pull, like something was trying to stop you? Picture this: you're standing in a quiet hospital hallway. The air is heavy. The lights above hum softly. And just beyond a cold metal door, someone you love is slipping away. You don't hear a voice, you don't see a light, but deep inside, something shifts. A whisper, a feeling, a quiet message, telling you not to give up. Not yet. This isn't a story of coincidence. It's a true account of one mother. And the moment her soul heard something greater than fear, a moment when hope returned, not through medicine or science, but through something invisible. An angel's sign before tragedy, before the doctors could understand, before the machines could warn her. She already knew, because something or someone had already spoken. A dream, a presence, a stillness in the silence. And it changed everything. In a world where we often search for logic, sometimes the answer comes from something we can't explain. This is one of those moments. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. That night, I couldn't breathe under the weight of my own thoughts. It wasn't just fear that kept me awake. It was guilt, the quiet, piercing kind that doesn't shout, but sits inside your chest like a stone that never moves. The hospital room was dim. Cold light from the hallway slipped under the door, painting soft lines on the floor. I sat beside her bed, hands folded, but I wasn't praying anymore. Not really. I had tried. I had whispered words into the silence. Please, just let her stay. But they didn't go anywhere. It felt like they hit the ceiling and dropped back into my lap unheard. Clara was sleeping, or maybe floating somewhere between dreams and something else. Her skin had lost its color. Her breath was light, too light, like she was already halfway gone, and all I could think about was the headache she mentioned 3 days earlier. It's probably just stress, I told her. She had exams, I had meetings, life was moving fast, and I missed it. I missed the sign, the real one, the one that said, "This is different." Now, in the sterile stillness of that hospital room, all I could see were the things I hadn't done. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, indifferent. Machines beeped in the background, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat pretending nothing was wrong. But I knew, I felt it. Something was wrong, and worse than the guilt was the silence from above. Where was God now? Where were the angels I used to believe in as a child? I remember looking up at the ceiling tiles, each one exactly like the last, and wondering if heaven was really that far, or if maybe I had just stopped listening. Then it happened. A moment, small, soft, but it broke through everything. I had closed my eyes for just a second, not to sleep, I couldn't, but to rest from the noise in my head. And in that second, I saw something, not a dream, not exactly. It was Clara, but older. Her hair was longer, her cheeks full of color. She was laughing, holding a small blue umbrella. The sky behind her was gold, full of light. And then a voice, not loud, not even outside me, just a feeling shaped like words. "She's not leaving, but you need to see her." I opened my eyes, heart racing. The room looked the same. The machines still blinked. The light hadn't changed, but something inside me had. The weight didn't go away, but it shifted. As if someone had lifted just enough of it so I could move closer to her. I stood, took her hand. It was warm. Warmer than before, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone in that room. I don't know what that moment was. A dream, a trick of exhaustion, or maybe Maybe it was an angel sign before tragedy, a whisper that came just in time, because that was the night things turned. The next morning the fever eased. The scans showed small signs of healing. The doctors didn't explain it. They called it unexpected response. But I knew. I never told them what I saw or what I heard. I just sat beside her and whispered, "Thank you," not to the doctors, not to the medicine, but to something greater. To this day, I still carry the guilt. A mother's heart never forgets what it missed. But I also carry that image, Clara under the golden sky, laughing with a blue umbrella, a memory that never happened, or maybe one that was gifted to me, to remind me that we're not as alone as we think, even in silence, even in fear. Sometimes we are being watched over, and sometimes the sign we need comes when we're just about to give up. It was deep in the night when I noticed it, the kind of silence that doesn't just surround you, but speaks. I had been sitting in the same hospital chair for hours, numb, half awake, watching Clara's chest rise and fall like the tide, slow, uncertain. The machines hummed softly, casting pale green lights across her face. And then my eyes fell on it, the little flower-shaped clock. It had been hers since she was 5, a tiny pink thing with chipped edges and a faded butterfly painted in the center. She used to call it her magic time flower, said it would always tell her when to go and when to stay. She had carried it through sleepovers, long car rides, even her first day of school. Now it sat on the edge of the hospital table, quietly frozen. 3:17. That's where the hands had stopped. I tapped the glass. Nothing. I turned it over, opened the battery case. Everything looked fine. Still the clock was silent. No tick, no whisper of time passing. And yet, something about that hour clung to me. 3:17. It didn't feel random. It felt chosen. A number that wouldn't let go, like time had exhaled and left a message behind. I stared at the frozen hands for a long time, longer than I should have. The soft sound of Clara's breath seemed to echo in the silence the clock had left behind. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a dead battery, a coincidence. But deep inside, I knew better, because when your child is slipping through your fingers, your soul learns to listen in strange ways. That motionless clock wasn't just a broken object. It was a mirror, a reflection of the fear I couldn't name. The tic-tac that didn't come felt like the heartbeat I was terrified of losing. I remember whispering her name, not to wake her, just to keep her here. "Clara, can you hear me?" She didn't move, but the room suddenly felt heavier, as if time itself had paused to watch. Later, I looked up what 3:17 could mean. Some said it was nothing. Others said it was a passage, a warning. I found a verse tucked away in an old notebook of mine, James 3:17. But the wisdom that comes from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle. And for a brief second I wondered, was that the message? Was the stopped clock a sign that someone, somewhere, wanted me to look deeper, to feel the weight of time not as something to fear, but to notice? It never ticked again, not after that night, but I kept it. I still have it, because that hour, that frozen minute, was when I began to understand that not all warnings shout. Some arrive quietly, in the silence between heartbeats, in the stillness of a clock that refuses to move forward. Because something or someone wants you to stay still long, enough to listen, and maybe, just maybe. 3:17 wasn't when something ended, it was when something began. Somewhere between exhaustion and despair, I must have drifted, not into sleep, but into that strange place where your eyes stay open, yet your mind begins to tremble under the weight of too many hours, too much fear. I was curled in the old armchair beside Clara's hospital bed, my body aching from the cold, synthetic air of the ICU. I watched the steady rise and fall of her chest. Slower, now but steady, and let my thoughts scatter like dust in the dark. That's when it happened. The hallway light beyond the glass door flickered once, then vanished. A sudden hush filled the space, not like the quiet of sleep, but something deeper, like the world itself had paused. And then a figure stepped through the threshold. Not through the door, through it. I didn't hear footsteps. There was no sound at all, just motion, smooth and certain, as a tall presence entered the room, cloaked in something I still can't name. It wasn't shadow, but it wasn't light either. It was something between. The figure stood beside Clara, still, silent. My breath caught. I couldn't move. Not out of fear exactly, but awe. As if I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. It didn't look like a nurse. There was no uniform, no face I could describe, just a presence. And around its head, something shimmered. Not glowing, not dim, but soft, like mist kissed by candlelight. I wanted to speak, but all I could do was stare. There was no sense of threat, only stillness, and then a strange, impossible calm. I blinked, once, maybe twice, and it was gone. The hallway light buzzed back on. The world exhaled, and I sat there, frozen, eyes wide, heartbeat louder than the machine's. Clara hadn't moved. She hadn't opened her eyes, but something had changed. Her breathing, it sounded different, deeper, fuller, like the grip around her lungs had loosened, like something inside her had turned toward the light. I didn't tell the nurse what I saw. I wasn't sure how to. How do you describe a moment that doesn't belong to this world? Was it a dream, a trick of the eye, or was it something sacred, a guardian standing between life and whatever waits beyond it? All I know is this: the fear that had wrapped itself around my heart cracked that night. Not because the danger was gone, but because I no longer felt alone in the room. Something had entered, seen her, touched something I could not. And whether it was shadow or light or both, I believe it came with a purpose. To remind me that there are moments in this life that stretch beyond what we can explain. Moments when the veil lifts and something holy walks among us. Not long after the figure vanished, I sat there, still too shaken to move. The room felt strangely full, not crowded, but held, as if something invisible was watching over us. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but just to rest from the weight of it all. The fear, the guilt, the long hours of helplessness. I let my head fall back against the chair, letting the soft hum of machines blend into the background. And then it came, a voice, clear, gentle, deep, like the sound of a distant bell echoing through warm air. She is not alone. I didn't think those words. They didn't rise from memory or imagination or some desperate wish. They arrived, fully formed, complete, but they weren't mine. The voice didn't come from the room or from down the hall. It came from within me, but not of me, like someone had poured it directly into my soul. Warmth spread through my chest, not sudden, not sharp, but slow, like dawn rising behind mountains. And with it came stillness. My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't sob. I just sat there, breathing. And for the first time in days, my breath didn't hurt. My heart, once racing with panic and blame, softened, slowed, as if something had pressed its hand gently against my chest and whispered, "Be still." She is held. I don't know whose voice it was. It wasn't my own. It wasn't a doctor's. It wasn't something I could explain or replay. But I know what it meant, and I know how it made me feel. Not abandoned, not lost, but watched over, protected. Some people say we imagine these moments when we're broken, that our minds create comfort where none exists. But this This wasn't created, it was given. And ever since that whisper, she is not alone, I stopped begging the silence for answers. Because I had already been given one, not loud, not grand, but enough. Enough to hold on, enough to trust, enough to believe that angel signs don't always come with wings or visions. Sometimes they come as a whisper, soft and undeniable, spoken in the dark by something holy. At some point my body gave in. I don't remember falling asleep. Only the feeling of soft release, like sinking into water after holding your breath for too long. And in that quiet place between sleep and something more, I saw her, Clara, not pale, not fragile like she was in the hospital, but radiant, laughing, barefoot, her arms outstretched as she ran through a wide, golden field. The wheat swayed high around her, brushing her hands as she passed, glowing under a light that didn't come from the sun, but from everywhere. She wore a white dress, simple, flowing, the kind she used to love when she was little and still believed in fairy tales. Her hair danced behind her like a ribbon caught in the wind. And her laughter. It was pure. Not just joyful, but whole, the sound of a soul untouched by pain. Then I saw him. A man stood just beyond the tall wheat, walking alongside her at a gentle pace. He wasn't dressed like a figure from a dream. No robes, no shining crown, just simple clothes, a soft shirt, rolled sleeves, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes so kind they almost stopped my breath. They were blue, but not like any blue I'd ever seen. They looked like sky and sea and something eternal all at once. When Clara reached him, she didn't stop. She smiled and ran in a circle around him, full of life, and he laughed softly, not with his mouth, but with his whole being. Then he turned to me. He looked straight into my eyes, like he knew me, not just my face, but my soul. And he said, with a voice that was both thunder and whisper, "She still has so much to live for." The words echoed, not through the air, but through me. And then I woke up, gasping, eyes wide, the weight of the dream still pressed against my chest like the memory of a warm hand. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The machines still hummed. The walls were still pale. Clara lay still, but peaceful. And the clock was still frozen at 3:17. I reached for it just to be sure. Still no movement, no ticking, but the silence didn't frighten me this time. Because somewhere deep inside, I had seen something that didn't belong to this world. Was it just a dream? A desperate mother's mind searching for comfort? Or was it something more, a window briefly opened, a glimpse through the veil, a whisper from the divine reminding me that the story wasn't over? Whatever it was, it left me with more than comfort. It left me with faith and a promise spoken in the golden light of a field not found on any map. She still has so much to live for. It was exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time etched on the stopped clock. The same time burned into my memory like a secret only I was meant to carry. I hadn't looked away from Clara in hours. After the dream, I couldn't. Something inside me felt different. Not calm exactly, but alert, like my soul was listening for something it couldn't explain. That's when the monitor changed. A sharp, rhythmic beeping broke through the stillness. Not frantic, but different. I leaned in, my breath caught. Her numbers were shifting. I pressed the call button without thinking. A nurse appeared, then another. The quiet room filled with movement. But I stayed still, watching Clara's face, waiting for something I couldn't name. Minutes passed. They checked the lines, repeated the vitals, adjusted the machines. Then came the murmurs, the frowns, the double-checking of charts, and then the words I'll never forget. "There's improvement." The swelling, the one they said was spreading too fast, was easing. Her fever, once uncontrollable, had started to drop. The oxygen levels were stabilizing. They ordered more tests. The neurologist came in with tired eyes and no answers. He stood by her bed, scanning the numbers on the screen, then the scan results, then back again. "It doesn't add up," he said softly, half to himself. "This turnaround doesn't match the medication timing. Not like this." I didn't speak. I couldn't, because I already knew. It wasn't the medicine, it wasn't the machines. Something had shifted from within her, like a light had been turned back on, like a message had reached wherever it needed to go, and been heard. 3:17. The same number that had stopped the clock. The same hour I had seen in the dream. The same whisper that told me she was not alone. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like confirmation, like heaven had left a breadcrumb, and I had finally found where it led. The nurses called it a miracle in passing, almost joking. The doctors called it unexpected recovery. But I knew better. It was never random. It was a sign, quietly delivered, gently received, and now answered. There's a moment when your child begins to return to you that feels like being given your own soul back. That was what 3:17 became for me. Not just a time, not just a clock, but the hour when the impossible shifted, when something unseen intervened. A few days later, when the storm had begun to pass and Clara was slowly waking into herself again, I opened her bag for the first time since we'd rushed to the hospital. It still smelled faintly of her, that mix of lavender lotion and pencil shavings. Inside were the usual things: a half-eaten granola bar, a water bottle, the novel she'd been reading, and tucked between the pages of that book, barely visible, was a folded piece of paper. I opened it gently, not expecting much. But what I found stopped me. It was written in her own uneven handwriting, blue ink, soft curves, the kind of letters only a child would shape with such care. "Angels walk with me, even when I'm asleep." I just stared at the words. The air around me seemed to pause, like even the hospital itself was holding its breath. I'd never seen that sentence before. We had never talked about it. She hadn't shown me. She hadn't read it aloud. But there it was, a quiet truth, written before the worst night of her life, before the fever, before the stopped clock, before the whisper. It was from her catechism class, a reflection maybe, or something she had written during a quiet moment when no one was watching. But somehow, she had known. Not what was coming, but who would be with her when it did. Tears welled up in my eyes, not out of fear or relief, but something else, a kind of holy ache. The realization that while I had doubted, while I had begged and questioned and feared, Clara had carried a truth deeper than my own. She had trusted in something I had forgotten, something I had once believed in too, back when I was a child. Before life became too loud for whispers, before the silence made me think I was alone. That little note was more than words. It was a message. And not just from her, but through her. A sign I hadn't asked for, but one I desperately needed. A reminder that even in the darkest night, even when no one is watching, even when the world feels quiet and empty, we are never truly alone. And maybe Clara had never been afraid. Because some part of her, the part that had scribbled that sentence and folded it into her bag, already knew. The angels never left. Not when the clock stopped. Not when the voice whispered. Not when the figure appeared beside her bed. They had been there the whole time, walking with her, even as she slept. On Clara's last day in the hospital, the sun returned with a warmth we hadn't felt in weeks. It poured gently through the windows, not harsh or loud, but soft, like a quiet hand brushing the world back to life. She was pale, thinner than before, but her eyes were bright again, awake, present. And when the nurse handed me the discharge papers, I almost didn't believe it. After everything, We were going home. I wheeled her out slowly, each turn of the chair feeling like a prayer, not rushed, not casual, just sacred. We passed through the long hallway, past the rooms where I had begged in silence, past the vending machine where I had once stood crying into a paper cup of cold coffee. And then we reached the garden. It was simple, a small space behind the building with a wooden bench, some wildflowers, and a tree that bent toward the sun. I stopped the wheelchair under its branches. Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the open air. Then she whispered almost to herself, "It smells like the dream." I was about to ask what she meant when it happened. A bird descended from above, silent and slow, landing just a few feet from where we sat. It wasn't a pigeon, though it looked like one. It was larger, its feathers so white they almost shimmered, and its eyes, clear, still, focused, locked onto ours as if it had come with intention. It stood there for several seconds, perfectly still. Then Clara, with a quiet certainty, said, "Mom, it was him, from my dream." She didn't smile. She didn't giggle with surprise. She just looked at the bird with a peace so complete, so deep, that it made the world pause again. The bird took one last glance, then lifted its wings and rose into the sky, slow, steady, without a sound. And I didn't question it, because in that moment I knew, not just believed, knew, that everything we had lived through had been real. The voice, the dream, the figure in the night, the frozen clock, even the whisper I had buried in doubt. They were not fragments of grief. They were gifts, messages wrapped in stillness, signs from something greater, from somewhere we can't always see. But sometimes, if we're quiet enough, we can feel. Clara had been protected, guided, not just by medicine, but by grace. And that white bird, that final sign, was not a goodbye. It was a farewell of light, a silent bow from the invisible to the visible, a closing of the circle. A reminder that even when we walk through the valley of shadows, there is always something walking beside us. Clara is healthy now. She laughs like the world never paused. She dances barefoot in the backyard when it rains. She sleeps with the window open and leaves the same little flower clock beside her bed, the one that once stopped when time itself seemed to hold its breath. And one day, it started ticking again. No one touched it. No one changed the battery. It simply began to move, as if the silence had served its purpose, and now it was time. But sometimes, just sometimes, when the world is quiet and I feel that ache again, when doubt visits in the early hours or life feels too loud to understand, I glance at the clock, and it stops. 3:17. Always 3:17. It doesn't frighten me, it doesn't confuse me anymore, because I've stopped trying to explain what was never meant to be understood. There are things in this life that don't fit into logic, moments that don't belong to science or reason or routine. They belong to the soul, to the unseen, to whatever holds us when we are falling, and whispers, "Not yet." That night didn't end with a miracle in the way the world defines it. There were no bright lights or wings unfolding in the dark, only a voice, a dream, a breath, and a mother who sat in silence as something unseen brought her child back piece by piece. Was it an angel, a message, a divine interruption timed so perfectly that it changed the rhythm of a life? I don't know. All I know is that I was lost. And something found me. It didn't shout, it didn't demand to be believed. It just came when I needed it most. Maybe I was saved by a vision, or maybe I was saved by a love that never sleeps, a love that watches over us in hospital rooms and dark hallways, that speaks through frozen clocks and forgotten notes, that places signs in our path not to impress us, but to remind us that we are never walking alone. Clara doesn't remember everything. She talks about the golden field sometimes, or the man with the gentle eyes, like you'd speak of a warm memory that lives just beneath the surface. But I remember it all, not with fear, not even with sorrow, but with reverence, because what we lived through was more than survival. It was sacred, and now I carry it, not as a wound, but as a light, a quiet knowing that when everything else fell silent, something whispered, "She is not alone." Have you ever felt something like that? A moment that didn't make sense, but changed everything? Do you believe it was just coincidence or something divine? Have you ever looked back and realized the timing was too perfect to ignore? Do you think angels still walk with us, even when we don't see them? If this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.